This is Mike.
This is Vlad.
This is Frank, and we are
Messenger.
And you're listening to Classic Christian Rock Podcast with Wildman and Steve.
Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Classic Christian Rock Podcast once again. And I'm here with my co-host, Steve Perkins, Latin teacher, rock and metal enthusiast. How are you doing today, Steve?
You know, honestly, I'm good, but I'm feeling the need to be resurrected. Maybe if I could find a band that could just res me up, I'd be even better.
Hey, you know what? That just might happen tonight, Steve. We'll just see as the night goes on. You might be very prophetic in what you just said. But before we begin, folks, I do have a plug. I want to throw a plug out there. Steve, is that okay with you if I throw a plug out?
You bet.
All right. Yes. Now, I'm not talking about, things for our head at our age now or anything like that. But I'm talking about just a quick advertisement, quick plug. And today I would love to just advertise Anthony Martinez. Anthony Martinez is the founder and owner of the Classic Christian Rock Zine, Z-I-N-E, website. And without him, this podcast would not be taking place. And you can find him at Anthony HN_777, and he also runs Classic Christian Rock 77 on Twitter. So, Anthony, if you're listening, we want to thank you for all that you do and how you support us in our endeavors.
You bet. Thanks, brother.
So today, folks, we have with us what I would call an icon, somebody who has meant so much to me and so many people from my era growing up. We have Glenn Kaiser from the Resurrection Band and his solo career as well, with a lot of blues stuff that Steve and I were just talking before the show, how much we enjoy all of his music. Glenn, welcome to the program. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, my pleasure. First of all, thanks for inviting me, and glad to do it. Here's the deal, guys. I love rain, always have, and it's been pouring buckets here in uptown in the inner city of Chicago today. So the truth is, I'm loving this. This is great.
Well, good. We're glad you had the time to join us, sir. We really appreciate you taking the time. So to begin with, as you know, I'm sure you've done many of these interviews before, Glenn, whether it's in print or whether it's audio. And, listeners just love to hear from the artists that they hear sing or play. So what if you just took our listeners back just for a moment to the beginning of what was it that inspired you to get into music in the first place?
Well, it's difficult to pinpoint it. But some of my earliest memories would go to my brother and sister. They had a little funky tube, I'm talking, small, with its own speaker and, tube plug-in phonograph, little vinyl record player. And I don't think it played anything other than 45s. Maybe it had 78s, and so that goes way back. We're not talking about LP, full albums, records, vinyl records. We're talking pre anything. This is like when the dinosaurs walked the earth. Anyway, they would play. The two of them would play Elvis, and I don't know, Patty Page. Maybe Annette Funicello. This goes way back to early days of rock and roll. I don't know, Bobby Darin or something. I don't know. This is old. I was a little guy. My brother was like 6 years older than me, and my sister 8 years older. And so some of my earliest memories were that. My mother had won singing contests in Milwaukee as a teenager. I think she was 17 or 18, and won citywide contests. Apparently she has some serious pipes. back in the day, and my dad. I mean, you know, I don't know how many of your listeners have even a clue who I'm about to talk about, but my dad played in dance bands, played a soprano saxophone, which is a straight sax, in dance bands with Fred McMurray. There was an old TV show called My Three Sons.
My Three Sons,
yeah.
Beaver Dam, Wisconsin is where I was born. I think Wikipedia says Milwaukee. There's a few things wrong with that. But anyway, yeah, Beaver Dam, little town, maybe 10,000 or something. At the time I was born, maybe a little less. But my dad grew up there and went to school with Fred McMurray, and they played in dance bands, jazz bands. And so there was a sort of music in my DNA. I mean, and there was always my mom was either playing old 45s or, well, I think she had 78s, which were the original speed of the full length records, in a big old again tube combination radio and record player. I'm talking like, y'all, I was like 5 or 6, and then they would both play the radio, which was just AM radio at the time, and nice warm tube sound. And my dad had a series of big honking Buicks. He would always buy used Buicks. These were like massive, big old honking cars. He would get them fairly cheap. Every couple, 2-3 years, buy another used one, but it was new to the family. And they all had these powerful, warm-sounding tube radios. And forgive me for saying tube over and over again, but if you're not a guitarist and you don't play, electric guitar and amps, you might not understand the warmth and there's a certain tonality of tube radios, and there's a compression involved. It's a warmth and a fullness, and so I grew up hearing music pretty constantly. And then as I got older, my mother had an upright piano in the house. My parents divorced when I was 9, and I ended up in West Allis, which is a working-class suburb of Milwaukee. And my mother had a piano, which was never quite in tune, which is cool because I play blues, so it doesn't matter, right? If it's a little out, if you get the dog towel and it sounds authentic, right? So, but she had that upright piano, and every I'd say 3 or 4 days she'd sit down and, she actually could play a bit. I never went very far with keyboards, but yeah. So music, right? Music, all through my youngest years.
So that kind of music, just listening to that, I mean, and it's interesting you talk to different artists or you listen to artist stories, and those who talk about having music in the household growing up, whether, again, it was just listening to it or they had musical family members, and you kind of had all that going on. But I want to talk a little bit about that, as you were talking about with the tone and the tubes and the radio and that. I don't know that every singer or instrumentalist necessarily has that ability to or even interest in the technical side of things, the equipment side of things. I think a lot do. I don't know that all do. So how did you come to really develop that ear so you're going, wow, that sound that I am really, that I enjoy is in part produced by this kind of equipment or these particular physical things that are causing that particular sound? How did you get into that deep?
Well, that's an interesting bit of perception, and I think you're right. I don't think everybody does pay that much attention. I think though a lot of guitar players, electric guitar players do, and acoustic guitarists also from a little different perspective. Maybe not so much. Depends on if there's a pickup, an electronic pickup in the acoustic instrument, whether it's a guitar or a mandolin, ukulele, dulcimer. Tone, right? Well, tone is interesting. First of all, I guess because I grew up hearing all of that stuff later on. I was 12 years old. saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, like a lot of people my age, and like a lot of other people like my age, freaked out and started pestering my mother for an electric guitar and an amp. And, you know, I think it was a matter of comparison from, you know, this old piece of junk amp that I had with other people's piece of junk little amps. The first band I was in, we all had junk, right? But because it's just funky little cheapo 10, 15, 20 watt, little small, not very powerful amplifiers, you know, made in Japan in the days when made in Japan didn't sound like a good idea. And I think, and then somebody had a magnetone. Now, magnetone was a model that actually is back on the market again as a sort of a boutique amp. Magnetone was this is getting real technical, so some of your listeners may get bored, but you asked a question, so here it is. What happened was, first of all, it looked cool. It had two 12-inch speakers, so it was a pretty big amp compared to the other stuff that we had. And this band that I was in, it was one of many in this country called the Lost Souls. There were several of those around. And we played like blues and R&B and soul music. We were all white kids, but we listened to a lot of black radio. And this is in the suburbs of Milwaukee. And whoever ended up with that magnetone, it was brown, man. It had brown, cool-looking speaker cover, you know, and brown fake leather. I think it was fake leather. So it looked cool. It looked cooler than the other stuff that I'd seen and that we had. Nobody could afford the big, what then was the big Fender amps, twin reverb or Showman, dual Showman. None of the people I was, you know, we were 12, 13-year-old kids. And then there was the Beatles had these big honking Vox amps, VOX, you know, and nobody could even touch that. And this is before Marshalls, before Jimi Hendrix and Cream and some of those bands came out playing through Marshalls or high watt, like the Who used high watts. All of these amps have their own tonal sort of ballpark sound. But when you got into the magnetones and certain Fenders, and even which now they kicked in again, called Supro. Supro was an old brand that went on for X amount of years. They made guitars. They made 6-string lap steel guitars that you play with a slide. And their amps, the Supro amps, 15-inch big honkin', one 15-inch speaker had 3 inputs, and they were essentially made for accordions. All right, but all of these amps I'm talking about, and starting with the Magnetones, the first one I ever saw, that was really cool. It had a fullness. It had low end and mid range, middle sounds, you know, tonality, and then high piercing treble as well. You could dial all that in, but the more powerful and the larger speaker, or the more speakers, if it had a couple of 12-inchers or a big honkin' 15, there was like, it threw me back, I suppose, in my mind, in my memory, in that sonic imprint, to riding around in my dad's car with him when he was cranking out in that warm, powerful-sounding tube radio with the big old speakers in those old Buicks. And it was a little bit like the larger of the phonograph radio combo, you know, I'm talking old ones, that we had in our front room. So I suppose there's a sense of warmth, a sense of fullness, low-end, mid-range, and high-end, all across the frequency spectrum. And that's probably where I started really paying attention. And then as time went on, I started to realize, like everybody does, you learn as you go, what makes that band live sound so good? And what does that guitar player, what is he using? Or she, or whatever, you know, or bass player, whatever. What kind of drums are they playing? And then drummers, same thing. They start thinking there's a certain way you tune the drum heads, and there's a certain kind of drum head. And you start to key in on tonality, and I think it becomes a sort of a sonic